One of my colleagues named Nancy Schaefer is a minister who died of a brain tumor a couple of years ago, and she wrote this series of reflections about what it was like to make room for joy in her life as that process was happening. And in this book, she tells a story about a woman she knows, Kate, who was teaching kids about dinosaur air, that all the air we've ever had on the earth has always been here. And she talks about the kids going, and holding it, afraid to use it. And then she tells them that they're all cousins, everyone related, even us to the dinosaurs. That these kids go around all day afterward, patting each other on the back, saying, cousin. Do you remember your first moments of awe and wonder like that? This is what I remembered when I thought about that this week. The first time I saw dinosaur bones. I was at a museum here in the Metroplex as a child, and it's this kind of concrete moment of thinking, there's so much I don't know. The world is bigger and more magical and mysterious than I could possibly imagine. I don't know if yours came at the feet of a Tyrannosaurus Rex like mine did, but I had others that would come at the planetarium in the chairs, looking up at the stars, or looking through a telescope with my dad while he showed me the rings of Saturn. Or playing on machines at the science place, the museum when I was a child that they would take us to, that would float ping pong balls on spurts of air and shoot things across the room. I didn't find out till I worked here that many of those machines that filled me with awe and joy were built and maintained by our member Ed Westmeyer. That he didn't know that he was providing me with these moments of wow. There was this sense when I was a kid and had those moments that the world had more possibility than I could ever imagine. And on this Mother's Day, I'm reminded that what modern science teaches us is that we're actually learning about what's possible in the world while we're still in our mother's womb. So the fetus in the womb of its mother, according to the science writer Annie Murphy Paul, is developing a taste for certain foods and spices that it shows preference for on the initial days of its life, learning this is what will be before me, this food is waiting. That the children adapt in their mother's womb to learn that the world they're about to enter will either be one of great wealth and prosperity or scarcity and hunger, that they already know. New studies are showing that children who are read particular passages of books, the study used Dr. Seuss, but children who are read particular passages of books will make positive interactions with those same passages if read to them during the first days of their life. They know this because they will suck on a nipple that brings them that sound as opposed to another one. Even if a parent, a mother they did this study, listening to a particular soap opera, watching a soap opera while they're pregnant, that the child will respond positively to the theme song of that soap opera more so than the theme song of another soap opera. And even that an infant child will cry in the accent of its native language, mimicking the same ways that the language goes up or down at the end of sentences, the way the inflections and tones are used. We're learning what's waiting for us even before we're born. You don't have to tell me that's a miracle. My wife and I realized one of the miracles of motherhood that we hadn't really thought about until a few weeks ago, that if a baby girl is born with all of the eggs that she'll ever have, then the egg which became my son was once carried by my wife while she was carried by her mother. That the egg which became my son was at one time held inside his grandmother. That's wild. But on this Mother's Day, I'm reminded also that you don't have to be a mom to raise somebody. That you don't have a choice, actually, whether someone is watching you, learning whether life has more goodness to offer or not. So here's a picture of my son the first day that he ever saw snow. It didn't come out as good here. This is a Texas boy who will likely see a few of these events in his lifetime. But he didn't get to choose this event. I picked him up, whether he wanted to be picked up or not, and took him outside and opened the door and held him up so that the snow would fall on his arms and his face and he'd have to feel it directly. But in my experience, as we grow older, fewer and fewer people do this for us. In fact, the story often changes from just wait, you'll see, to just wait, you'll see. So that one made sense. Yeah? That instead of people saying, look, wow, the older that I get, the more often I've noticed that the people who are older than I am say that to me less and less and less. I think that we are steeped in this cultural narrative that life used to be good, and then it got bad, and it's getting worse, and oh boy, you'll really find out someday. And why not? Most of us grew up with the story of the fall, the image of Adam and Eve in the garden, this familiar one that you probably all know. A perfect world, which is marred by human imperfection and mistakes, an explanation for the pain and suffering of our lives. Now, Jewish and Christian Western traditions are not the only ones to teach this story. I hear people confuse that all the time and say, wouldn't it be great if we could think like the Buddhists or the Hindus who don't believe that things are only getting worse? Well, I have a degree in religious ethics and world traditions. Everybody thinks that's what happened. The Hindus and the Buddhists and the Jains and the Sikhs all tell a story about the yugas, the stages of the universe. You'll not be surprised that the original one was perfection, where humanity and the gods existed in peaceful coexistence, and then mistakes were made, and things have gotten worse and worse, and you'll no doubt guess that we are in the worst stage. But I don't know how many of you have gone back and actually read those initial chapters of Genesis lately, but when I did this week, I saw two authors fighting one another. See, this is Genesis 2. This is the story of the garden, an explanation for why life got bad, written from the perspective of someone a few thousand years ago, perfection and decay. But the first chapter of Genesis actually looks a little bit more like this. That's the Eagle Nebula. This is where baby stars are born. The first chapter of the book of Genesis is this author wrestling with what life might have looked like when it emerged. The beginning, a dark void of chaos, an explosion of light. The bodies of the heavens form into solids. Life emerges from the water and the ground and the air. Looks a lot more like evolution. There's always this tension in us between believing that there's something wonderful still waiting for us and believing that all of our better days are long gone. Our theology is actually cosmos theology, right? Liberal theology, and that's opposed to literal theology. Liberal theology affirms that there is always more truth to be found. Always more truth to be found. That we look at science and see that instead of a world that started in perfection and ends with decay, actually what happens is in every eon, in every year, in every second, something that's never been before is actually taking shape. If we believe that, then it means the same creative forces that exploded those stars billions of years ago are the same laws of nature, the same holy principles of the divine that move your heart and your lungs and your blood. And yet, how easily do we fall into, you'll see, just wait. I think we can go around, even if we don't believe it, teaching the theology of the good old days in very practical, everyday ways, especially to people younger than us or people that are about to enter our life stage. When my wife and I were waiting to have a baby when she was pregnant, we were shocked at how quickly people came to the conclusion that it was a good idea to tell us horror stories about a labor gone bad, or the hundreds of hours of sleep that you will no doubt lose in the coming year. Do you know how expensive a baby is, people would say to me. There were this small group of people, and we remember who they were, who said to us, it's going to be amazing. You have no idea the joy and wonder that's waiting for you. Yes, it is hard. Yes, it's the most terrifying thing you've ever done, and you will experience beauty and wonder like you've never seen. We can remember the group of people who made a point to say that to us. And yet, how easy it was for people, and I'm sure you face this in your life even if you're not a parent, that people will say, well, you don't really get it yet. You're not a real human because you're not graduated from high school. But when you do, then you'll get it. Well, you're not living a real human life yet because you don't own a home. But when you're a member of the Real Persons Club, then you'll see how bad it is. Or the stories we tell, people would tell us, when you have a kid X, and then they'd ask us how it was having a kid, and we'd say, it's wonderful. And they'd say, well, that's because you don't have two. When you have two... And I'm assuming that the people who have two have been told that they won't get it until they have 3 or 4. How come we say we don't believe the story that the world only has less good in it, and yet we repeat that all the time? Instead of just wait, you'll see. Just wait, you'll see. We do this when we tell the stories of the good old days over and over again, whether it's the fact that this country or this state or this school or this club or this church was way better back in my day. And there are a number of problems with these stories and the lessons they teach to those listening. The first problem is that when you say back in my day, it is as if you're not alive. What you're implicitly saying to someone is, I do not like the way that this is, and I am either unable or unwilling to do something about it. You teach a story to those listening that as you get older, you slide either into chosen irrelevance or into a life without power, and it's not true. The second ill effect of the theology of the good old days playing its way out in our everyday stories is that when we hear those stories over and over, and I mean whether you're 70 listening to the 90-year-old or 5 listening to the 15-year-old, the other problem is that when we hear those stories told over and over again, the implicit message is, we're running out of good. And when you get to be my age, there will only be less. That is not the value that we teach in this tradition. New life, new insight springing up over and over. I think at some point in our lives, no one's going to pick us up and take us outside, whether we want to or not, and force us to sit in the rain or the snow and go, wow. If they do, thank them. I think we have to make a conscious spiritual choice to engage in the discipline of, on purpose, cultivating awe. Of picking out moments and saying, I need to find a place to say the words wow out loud and believe that there is more good left in this world. I've seen members of our church doing this. So when Pamela Townsend turned 65, this was the card she sent for her birthday party. That's Pam going skydiving for her 65th birthday. This is a woman who is not done being surprised by life. And she didn't have to sit me down and give me a lesson. The card said everything it needed to. Or maybe it's Claudia Dixon, who's in our choir, rafting down whitewaters with her children and grandchildren. She didn't have to sit her granddaughters down and say, look, I want to promise you there is mystery and wonder and holy goodness waiting for you as you get older. She didn't have to do that. They just think that's what having grandkids looks like. Yeah? This week, I was asking members of our congregation to send me stories of when someone in the next stage of life promised them that there was wonder and awe to be found. And then I sat down to prepare the memorial service for our friend Ross Powell with his family. They shared with me the last letter that he wrote to them in an envelope that begins, "Just in case the plane goes down, remember that this phase, life, was wonder-filled. After grieving, please rejoice. Remember how much joy, and I mean infinite, you brought to my life. Seek the same for your own. Trouble is an illusion. Love is not. I love you. I love you." What a wonderful last thing to hear from your parent. This life was wonder-filled. The original Mother's Day proclamation was an attempt by one woman to join with other women in saying, there's another better way of living. And this was not naive. These were women who knew the realities of violence and war. They had seen their sons and husbands go off to be trained to kill someone else's sons and husbands in some of the most violent combat that the world had ever seen. And yet they said, we still have hope that something else is possible. What I remember this Mother's Day is that you do not have to be a mom. You do not have to be a parent to raise somebody. In fact, you don't get a choice. Whether you see them or not, someone is watching you and learning from your life what is possible in their future. Is there only less good to be found? Is there only cynicism or boredom or nostalgia for days gone by? Or is there the capacity in all stages of life to say, wow, out loud and mean it? Your task this Mother's Day, dads, moms, uncles, aunts, those of you without children, is to find a way to communicate to someone you love that there is more good left in these lives that we have, not less. And for that, I wish you luck. Happy Mother's Day to all of you, whatever your families look like. Many blessings on you, and amen.